The wind howled across the empty road like a wounded animal, carrying with it the promise of an early winter storm. Clara Whitmore pulled her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders and quickened her pace, her worn boots crunching against the frozen dirt path that led from Silverbrook back to her small cabin at the edge of town. She had stayed too late at Mrs. Henderson's general store, mending the woman's Sunday dress for a handful of coins that would barely cover the cost of flour for the week. But Clara never complained. At 23 years old, she had learned that complaining changed nothing. Life simply was what it was, and she had long ago accepted her place in it. The Colorado sky had turned an angry shade of grey, and the first flakes of snow were beginning to fall when Clara heard a sound that made her blood run cold. It was a groan, low and pained, coming from the brush at the side of the road. She stopped, her heart hammering in her chest. Every instinct told her to keep walking, to hurry home before the storm trapped her outside. Bandits roamed these roads, desperate men, dangerous men. A woman alone had no business investigating strange sounds in the dying light of day. But then the sound came again, and this time it was unmistakably human. Someone was hurt. Clara hesitated for only a moment longer before her feet carried her toward the sound. She pushed aside the dead brambles and gasped at what she found. A man lay crumpled against a fallen log, his dark hair matted with blood, his face pale as the snow that was beginning to dust his broad shoulders. He was a big man, tall and muscular, the kind of man who would tower over her if he was standing. His clothes, though torn and stained with blood, looked expensive. Fine wool coat, leather boots that had seen better days but were clearly well made. His eyes were closed, but his chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. He was alive. Barely. Clara knelt beside him, her practical mind already assessing the situation. There was a gash on his forehead, still oozing blood. His left arm hung at an odd angle, and when she carefully pushed aside his coat, she found his shirt soaked with blood from what looked like a knife wound in his side. "Mister," she said softly, reaching out to touch his cold cheek. "Mister, can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open, and Clara found herself staring into the deepest brown eyes she had ever seen. They were glazed with pain, but there was something else there too. A fierce intelligence that seemed to take her measure even as he struggled to remain conscious. "Help," he managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Please." Clara looked around helplessly. The storm was picking up, the wind biting through her shawl. There was no way she could carry this man to town. He was easily twice her size, all muscle and bone, but she could not leave him here to die either. "I live a quarter-mile down the road," she said, keeping her voice calm and steady. "Can you walk if I help you?" He nodded weakly, though Clara doubted he truly understood what he was agreeing to. She positioned herself under his good arm, wrapping her arm around his waist, careful to avoid the wound in his side. The closeness of him was startling. Even half dead, he radiated warmth like a furnace, and she could smell leather and pine and something else beneath the copper tang of blood, something distinctly masculine that made her cheeks flush despite the cold. "On three," she said. "1, 2, 3. Getting him to his feet was one of the hardest things Clara had ever done. He was heavy, so much heavier than she had anticipated, and his legs seemed barely capable of supporting his weight. But somehow, through sheer determination on her part, and what must have been an iron will on his, they began to move. The journey to her cabin took nearly an hour. Several times, Clara thought they would both collapse into the snow and freeze to death before morning. The man drifted in and out of consciousness, muttering things she could not understand. Names, perhaps, places. Once he called out for someone named Thomas, his voice breaking with grief. By the time Clara kicked open the door of her cabin, she was trembling with exhaustion, and the stranger was barely conscious. She half-dragged, half-carried him to her small bed, and let him fall onto the mattress with a groan that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. The cabin was small and humble. Just one room with a bed, a table, 2 chairs, and a cast-iron stove that Clara immediately set to work stoking with the last of her firewood. She would worry about gathering more tomorrow. Tonight, she needed heat, and she needed it fast. When the fire was crackling and the room had begun to warm, Clara returned to her patient. He had lost consciousness again, his face grey and drawn in the flickering firelight. She knew she should fetch Doc Peterson from town, but the storm had become a full blizzard now, the wind screaming outside her thin walls like a chorus of the damned. No one would be travelling tonight. Whatever she could do for this man, she would have to do alone. Clara had no formal medical training, but she had helped her mother tend to sick neighbours before consumption had claimed her 5 years ago. She knew the basics: clean the wounds, stop the bleeding, keep the patient warm. She set a pot of water to boil on the stove and gathered her meagre supplies: clean rags that she had been saving for mendings, the small bottle of whiskey she kept for emergencies, the sewing needle and thread that were her livelihood. When the water was ready, Clara took a deep breath and approached the bed. The man's coat was ruined, so she cut it away with her scissors, then did the same to his shirt. What she found beneath made her breath catch in her throat. He was beautiful. Even wounded and pale, there was no other word for it. His chest was broad and muscled, covered with a light dusting of dark hair. His shoulders were impossibly wide, his arms thick with strength. Scars crisscrossed his skin, old ones and new ones, telling the story of a life that had known violence. But there was something almost artistic about the way his body was put together, like he had been carved by a sculptor who understood the meaning of male perfection. Clara shook her head, embarrassed by her own thoughts. She was a practical woman, not given to flights of fancy about handsome strangers, and this man needed her help, not her admiration. She cleaned the wound in his side first, wincing in sympathy as she poured whiskey over the torn flesh. He groaned but did not wake, which she supposed was a mercy. The cut was deep but clean, likely made by a hunting knife. It had missed any vital organs as far as she could tell, but it would need stitches. Clara had never stitched human flesh before. Fabric, yes, leather occasionally. But skin was different. It was warm and alive, and the thought of pushing a needle through it made her stomach turn. "I am sorry," she whispered to the unconscious man. "I am so sorry. But this is going to hurt." She threaded her needle with the steadiest hands she could manage, and began. The man woke halfway through, his body jerking violently as a cry of pain tore from his throat. Clara pressed her hand against his chest, holding him down with strength she did not know she possessed. "Be still," she commanded. "I am almost finished. Be still, or you will tear the stitches." His eyes found hers, wild with pain and confusion, but something in her voice must have reached him because he stopped struggling. He lay there, his chest heaving, his jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscles jumping beneath his skin, and he let her work. When she tied off the last stitch, Clara sat back, trembling with exhaustion. The man's eyes were still on her face, and some of the wildness had faded, replaced by something that looked almost like wonder. "Who are you?" he rasped. "My name is Clara Whitmore. I found you on the road. You were hurt." He blinked slowly, as if processing this information required enormous effort. "Robbed," he said finally. "3 men. They took everything." "You are safe now," Clara said. "Rest. I will take care of you." His eyes drifted closed, but just before sleep claimed him, she heard him whisper, "Angel." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. She was no angel. She was just a poor seamstress with nothing to her name but a leaky cabin and a stubborn refusal to give up. But as she cleaned the blood from her hands and prepared to tend to the gash on his forehead, she found herself hoping that somehow, some way, this wounded stranger would survive the night. The storm raged for 3 days. Clara had never been so exhausted in her life. She slept in snatches, dozing in the chair beside the bed, waking every few hours to check on her patient. His fever came on the 2nd day, fierce and relentless, and she spent hours bathing his face with cool water, trying to keep his temperature down. He was delirious for most of it, trapped in nightmares that made him thrash and cry out. He called for Thomas again and again, sometimes begging forgiveness, sometimes warning him to run. Once he grabbed Clara's wrist with surprising strength and stared at her with eyes that did not see her at all. "I could not save him," he said, his voice breaking. "I could not save my brother." Clara's heart ached for him, for whatever tragedy haunted his dreams. She stroked his hair back from his fevered forehead and murmured soothing nonsense until his grip loosened and he fell back into restless sleep. On the 3rd day, the fever broke. Clara was dozing in her chair when she heard him speak, and this time his voice was clear and strong. "Where am I?" She jerked awake, nearly falling out of the chair in her haste to reach him. He was propped up on one elbow, looking around the cabin with alert eyes. His color was better, no longer grey but merely pale, and when his gaze found her there was recognition in it. "You are in my cabin," Clara said, "about a 1/4 mile outside of Silverbrook, Colorado. Do you remember what happened?" He frowned, thinking. "I remember the road. 3 men came out of the trees. They had guns." His hand went to his side, pressing against the bandage she had wrapped around his torso. "One of them had a knife." "They left you for dead," Clara said. "I found you and brought you here. The storm trapped us, so I could not fetch a doctor. I did what I could." He looked down at the neat stitches in his side, then back at her face. Something shifted in his expression, a kind of wonder that made Clara feel uncomfortable and pleased all at once. "You saved my life. I did what anyone would have done." "No," he said quietly. "Not anyone. Most people would have kept walking, would have told themselves it was not their concern. You stopped. You brought me here a complete stranger and you cared for me. That is not nothing, Miss Whitmore." Clara did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Instead, she stood and moved to the stove, where a pot of thin soup was warming. She ladled some into a bowl and brought it to him. "You need to eat. You lost a lot of blood." He accepted the bowl, but before he could take a bite, he paused. "You have been taking care of me for 3 days. When did you last eat?" The question caught Clara off guard. She tried to remember. Yesterday, perhaps, a piece of stale bread, maybe the day before. "I have eaten." He looked at the meager contents of her cupboard, visible from where he sat. A half-empty bag of flour, a few potatoes, nothing else. His jaw tightened. "I am sorry," he said. "I have been eating your food. You needed it more than I did. That does not make it right." He set the bowl aside. "I will not eat another bite until you have had your share." Clara opened her mouth to argue, but something in his expression stopped her. There was a stubbornness there that matched her own, and she realized that arguing would be pointless. She retrieved a second bowl and served herself a small portion of the soup. They ate in silence for a moment, and Clara found herself studying him now that he was awake and lucid. He was older than she had first thought, perhaps in his mid-30s. His face was strong and angular, with a square jaw and a nose that had clearly been broken at least once. There were lines around his eyes and mouth, the kind that came from too much time squinting into the sun and not enough time smiling. He was handsome, she realized, not in the pretty way of the young men who sometimes came into the general store, preening and posturing. His was a harder kind of handsomeness, forged by years of work and weather. He looked like the kind of man who had seen things, done things, the kind of man who could be dangerous if he chose to be. And yet, the way he had refused to eat until she did, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her, suggested there was gentleness in him too, hidden perhaps, but there. "I realize I have not introduced myself," he said, breaking the silence. "My name is Samuel Blackwood. My friends call me Sam." "Sam," Clara repeated, testing the name on her tongue. It suited him. Simple and strong. "I have a ranch in Montana," he continued. "I was traveling back from Denver where I sold a herd of cattle. The men who robbed me took everything, my money, my horse, my papers." He paused, a muscle ticking in his jaw. "They left me with nothing but my life, and I would not even have that if not for you. What will you do now?" He was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes fixed on the dancing flames in the stove. "I do not know. I cannot travel in my condition, and even if I could, I have no money, no horse. I would not get far." "You can stay here," Clara heard herself say, "until you are healed. It is not much, but it is warm, and the storm will not last forever." Sam looked at her, and there was something in his expression that made her heart skip. Gratitude, yes, but something else too. Something that looked almost like tenderness. "You barely have enough food for yourself. I cannot ask you to share it with me." "You are not asking, I am offering." Clara lifted her chin, a gesture of defiance she had perfected over years of dealing with people who underestimated her. "And anyway, you cannot very well stop me. You can barely sit up." A ghost of a smile crossed his face, the first she had seen from him. It transformed his features, softening the hard lines and making him look almost boyish. "You have a point, Miss Whitmore. You have a point." The days that followed settled into a routine. Clara continued her work, walking into town each day to pick up mending jobs and deliver finished pieces. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world blanketed in white, and the townspeople were eager to have their winter clothes repaired before the worst of the cold set in. She told no one about the stranger in her cabin. She knew what people would say, what assumptions they would make. Clara Whitmore, the orphan seamstress with no family and no prospects, keeping company with an unknown man. The gossip would be vicious. The scandal would be ruinous. And so she kept her secret, slipping home each evening with whatever food she could afford, pretending that nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Sam was a model patient, quiet and undemanding, doing his best to help despite his injuries. He insisted on keeping the fire stoked while she was gone, and she often came home to find him attempting to tidy the cabin with his one good arm. His other arm was healing, but slowly, and Clara had fashioned a sling for it out of an old petticoat. They talked in the evenings, long conversations that stretched into the night, their voices soft in the firelight. Sam told her about his ranch, about the wide-open spaces of Montana, where a man could ride for hours without seeing another soul. He described the mountains that touched the sky and the rivers that ran cold and clear, filled with fish that practically jumped onto your line. He painted pictures with words, and Clara found herself dreaming of places she had never seen. "You should see it in the spring," Sam said one night, his eyes distant with memory. "The whole valley turns green, and there are wildflowers everywhere. Purple and yellow and red, spreading across the hills like someone spilled paint across the earth." He paused, and when he looked at her, there was something wistful in his expression. "You would love it, Clara. I know you would." Her heart ached at his words, at the future he was describing, a future she would never see. But she smiled and nodded and asked him to tell her more, because listening to his voice was better than thinking about the day he would leave. He told her about his brother Thomas, who had died 2 years ago in a stampede, and how the grief of it still haunted him. His voice broke when he spoke of his brother, and Clara saw the pain he carried, the guilt that weighed on him like a physical burden. "He was younger than me," Sam said, staring into the fire. "I was supposed to protect him. That was my job. And I failed." Clara reached out and laid her hand over his. It was a bold gesture, more intimate than anything she had ever allowed herself with a man, but it felt right somehow. Natural. "You did not fail him. What happened was an accident, a tragedy. But it was not your fault." Sam turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. His hand was so much larger than hers, calloused and rough, but his grip was gentle. "You are kind to say so, kinder than I deserve." "I am not kind," Clara said. "I am honest. There is a difference." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Clara felt a flutter in her chest that she'd never experienced before. She knew she was not beautiful. Her hair was plain brown, always escaping its pins. Her face was too thin, her eyes too wide, her nose slightly crooked from a fall she had taken as a child. She was too skinny, her figure lacking the curves that men seemed to admire. All her life she had been overlooked, dismissed as the plain seamstress with no dowry and no future. But the way Sam was looking at her made her feel like something else entirely. Like she was worth looking at, worth seeing. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly. Clara shook her head, embarrassed by her own thoughts. "Nothing. It is foolish." "Tell me anyway." She hesitated, then spoke before she could lose her nerve. "I was thinking that no one has ever looked at me the way you're looking at me right now." Sam's grip on her hand tightened. "And how am I looking at you?" "Like I matter." Something fierce flashed in his dark eyes. "You do matter, Clara. You matter more than you know." She did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. But she did not pull her hand away, and neither did he, and they sat there in the firelight, connected by that simple touch, until the fire burned low and sleep claimed them both. 2 weeks passed, then 3. Sam's wounds were healing well, far better than Clara had hoped. The stitches in his side held firm, and the wound showed no sign of infection. His arm was still weak, but he could move it now without wincing, and the color had returned to his face. Each day he grew stronger, and each day Clara felt the weight of knowing that his departure was drawing closer. She found herself memorizing the small details of him, the way he held his coffee cup, wrapped in both hands like he was drawing warmth from it. The sound of his laugh, rare but genuine, a deep rumble that seemed to come from somewhere in his chest. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled at something she said. The habit he had of pushing his dark hair back from his forehead when he was thinking. These were dangerous thoughts, and Clara knew it. Sam Blackwood was not the kind of man who stayed in places like Silverbrook, in cabins like hers. He had a life waiting for him in Montana, a ranch and a fortune, and a world that Clara could barely imagine. When he was well enough to travel, he would leave, and she would return to her quiet existence as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. She just could not admit it yet. He should have been making plans to leave, to return to his ranch in Montana, to his life before the robbery. But every time Clara tried to bring up the subject, he found a way to change it. "The snow is still too deep for travel. My arm is not strong enough to handle a horse. I need to regain my strength before attempting such a journey." Clara did not argue with him, even though she suspected his excuses were just that, excuses. The truth was, she did not want him to leave. These past weeks had been the happiest of her life, and the thought of returning to her solitary existence filled her with a dread she could not explain. She told herself it was because she had grown used to the company, that was all. She was lonely, and Sam was kind, and there was nothing more to it than that. But late at night, when she lay on her pallet by the stove and listened to Sam breathing in her bed, she knew she was lying to herself. She had fallen in love with him. The realization struck her like a blow, leaving her breathless and terrified. She had never been in love before. She had never allowed herself to dream of such things, knowing they were not for women like her. Men did not fall in love with poor seamstresses. They fell in love with beautiful heiresses, with charming socialites, with women who had something to offer beyond a pair of capable hands and a stubborn spirit. Clara had nothing to offer Sam Blackwood. And she knew, with a certainty that cut like a knife, that when he finally left, he would take her heart with him. She tried to protect herself. She pulled back, became more reserved, busied herself with mending and cleaning, and any task that would keep her hands occupied and her mind from wandering to dangerous places. But Sam noticed. Of course he noticed. "Have I done something to offend you?" he asked one evening, catching her hand as she tried to hurry past him. Clara stared at their joined hands, at the contrast of his large, calloused fingers wrapped around her small, work-worn ones. Her heart was beating so fast she was sure he could hear it. "No, you have done nothing wrong. Then why do you pull away every time I try to speak with you? Why do you avoid my eyes?" His voice was gentle but persistent. "I thought we had become friends, Clara. If I have overstepped somehow, you have not." She forced herself to look at him, and what she saw in his eyes nearly undid her. Concern, confusion, and something else, something that looked almost like hurt. Then what is it? She could not tell him the truth. She could not confess that she had fallen in love with him, that his kindness and his stories and his quiet strength had worked their way into her heart and taken root there. She could not burden him with feelings he could never return. "I am just tired," she lied. "The extra work of nursing you has worn me down, that is all." Sam studied her face for a long moment, and Clara had the uncomfortable feeling that he could see right through her, but finally he nodded and released her hand. "Then you must rest. I can take care of myself now. You have done more than enough." She should have been relieved. Instead, she felt the absence of his touch like a physical loss, and she had to turn away before he could see the tears that threatened to spill down her cheeks. That night, lying on her pallet by the stove, Clara pressed her hand to her heart and made herself a promise. She would be strong. She would survive this, just as she had survived everything else life had thrown at her. And when Sam finally left, she would smile and wish him well and pretend that her heart was not shattering into 1,000 pieces. It was the only way forward, the only way to protect herself from the devastation she knew was coming. But the heart has a way of ignoring our carefully laid plans. It happened on a Thursday. Clara had gone into town for supplies, using the small amount of money she had earned that week to buy flour and salt and a precious sliver of bacon. She was walking home, her basket over her arm, when she rounded a bend in the road and found 3 men blocking her path. She recognized them instantly. The bandits who had robbed Sam. They were rough-looking men, dirty and unshaven, with eyes that held no warmth. The leader, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, stepped forward, a cruel smile curving his lips. "Well, well, if it ain't the little seamstress. We've been watching you, girlie. Noticed you've been buying more food than usual. Wondering why that might be." Clara's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears, but she forced herself to stay calm. "I do not know what you mean." The man laughed, an ugly sound. "Don't play dumb with us. We know you've got that rancher holed up in your cabin, the one we left for dead on the road." He stepped closer, close enough that Clara could smell the whiskey on his breath. "Thing is, we went through his saddlebags after we took him down. Found letters. Interesting letters. Turns out that rancher ain't just any rancher. He's Samuel Blackwood, one of the richest cattlemen in Montana." Clara's blood ran cold. "We figure his family will pay a pretty penny to get him back. So here's what's gonna happen. You're gonna take us to him, nice and quiet, and if you behave yourself, maybe we'll let you live." The man grabbed her arm, his grip bruising. "And if you don't, well, there are worse things than dying." Clara's mind raced. She had no weapon, no way to fight off 3 armed men, but she could not lead them to Sam. She could not. Run! The scream tore from her throat before she could stop it, echoing through the empty woods. The man cursed and raised his hand to strike her, but before the blow could land, there was a deafening crack and the man stumbled backward, a bloom of red spreading across his shoulder. Sam emerged from the trees, a rifle in his hands, his face carved from granite. Get away from her! The bandits scattered, drawing their guns, but Sam was faster. He fired again, catching one of them in the leg. The third man turned to run, and Sam let him go, his attention fixed on the leader, who was struggling to his feet with a snarl of rage. "You should have stayed dead, rancher. And you should have killed me when you had the chance." The man lunged, drawing a knife, the same knife that had carved the wound in Sam's side. Clara screamed as Sam threw the rifle aside and met the attack head-on, grappling with the man in a brutal struggle that seemed to last an eternity. They rolled across the frozen ground, exchanging blows, until finally Sam got his hands around the man's throat. For a moment, Clara thought he would kill him. She could see it in his eyes, that cold fury, the desire for vengeance. "Sam," she said, her voice trembling. "Sam, please, do not do this." He looked at her, and something in his expression shifted. The fury faded, replaced by something softer, something human. He released his grip and pushed the man away, leaving him gasping in the snow. "Get out of here," Sam said, his voice deadly quiet. "If I ever see you again, I will not be so merciful." The man scrambled to his feet and ran, disappearing into the trees after his companions. Only when he was gone did Sam turn to Clara, his expression crumbling. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you?" Clara shook her head, unable to speak. The terror of the past few minutes was catching up with her, and her legs felt like water beneath her. She would have fallen if Sam had not caught her, pulling her against his chest, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "I am sorry," he murmured into her hair. "I am so sorry. I put you in danger. I should never have stayed so long. I should have known they might come back." Clara pulled back just enough to look at him. "How did you know? How did you know to come? I saw them from the window, following you down the road. I grabbed the rifle and ran." His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away tears she had not realized she was crying. "If anything had happened to you, but it did not, you saved me. You saved me first." They stood there in the road, holding each other, the cold forgotten, the danger fading into the background. And then Sam did something that Clara would remember for the rest of her life. He kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, soft and tentative, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But Clara did not pull away. She leaned into him, her hands fisting in his coat, and kissed him back with all the longing she had been holding inside for weeks. When they finally broke apart, Sam rested his forehead against hers, his breath coming fast. "I should not have done that." "Why not?" "Because I have nothing to offer you. I may have money waiting for me in Montana, but right now I am a penniless man standing in the middle of a frozen road, holding a woman who deserves far better than anything I could give her." Clara laughed, the sound surprising her as much as it did him. "Sam Blackwood, I have been poor my entire life. Do you think I care about money? You should. You deserve comfort, security, a life without worry." "What I deserve," Clara said, "is to decide for myself what I want, and what I want—" She trailed off, suddenly shy. "Tell me," Sam urged, his voice rough. "Please." Clara took a deep breath. "I want you. I want mornings spent talking by the fire, and evenings spent reading together by candlelight. I want someone who looks at me like I am worth something. I want someone who makes me feel less alone." She met his eyes, her heart laid bare. "I want you, Sam. Just you." Sam stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then slowly a smile spread across his face, the most beautiful smile she had ever seen. Then you shall have me, Clara Whitmore, for as long as you will have me." He kissed her again, and this time there was nothing tentative about it. It was a kiss full of promise and passion, a declaration of intent that left her breathless and trembling in his arms. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Sam rested his forehead against hers and laughed softly. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," he confessed. "Ever since I woke up and saw your face looking down at me, I thought I had died and gone to heaven." Clara laughed too, the sound strange and wonderful in her own ears. She could not remember the last time she had laughed like that, free and unguarded. "I thought you were delirious." I was, delirious with gratitude. Delirious with amazement that such a beautiful, courageous woman had appeared to save my sorry life. He pulled back to look at her, his expression serious. "I mean it, Clara. You are the most remarkable woman I have ever met. You are biased. Your head was injured. My head was injured, my eyes were not." He traced his thumb along her cheekbone, his touch feather-light. "I see you, Clara Whitmore. I see your strength and your kindness and your quiet dignity. I see the way you take care of everyone around you without asking anything in return. I see the way you work until your fingers are raw just to scrape by and never once complain about your lot in life." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. No one had ever looked at her like that, seen her like that. She had spent her whole life invisible, overlooked, dismissed, and here was this man, this wonderful, impossible man, telling her she was remarkable. "You make me sound better than I am." "No, I'm finally seeing you as you truly are, and I'm never going to stop." When they finally made their way back to the cabin, hand in hand, Clara felt something she had not felt in years. Hope, pure, unbridled hope for a future she had never dared to imagine. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Sam's strength returned fully, and with it, his determination to make things right. He borrowed a horse from the town livery, promising to pay double when he returned, and rode to the nearest telegraph office to send word to his foreman in Montana. 3 days later, a reply came, along with a money transfer that made the telegraph operator's eyes nearly pop out of his head. "Mr. Blackwood," the man stammered, "I had no idea." "No one did," Sam said, "and I would appreciate it if you kept it that way." But word spread, as it always does in small towns. Within a week, everyone in Silverbrook knew that the mysterious stranger Clara Whitmore had been sheltering was actually Samuel Blackwood, owner of one of the largest cattle ranches in Montana Territory. The gossip was fierce. "Did you hear? She nursed him back to health, alone, in that little cabin." Scandalous. Simply scandalous. "I always knew she was no good. Her mother was the same way." Clara did her best to ignore it, but the whispers followed her everywhere she went. The women who had once hired her for mending suddenly found other seamstresses. The storekeepers, who had always been polite, became cold and distant. It was as if her act of kindness had marked her as something shameful. Sam was furious. "This is because of me," he said, pacing the cabin like a caged animal. "They are punishing you because of me." "It does not matter," Clara said, though her voice was quiet. "I knew what would happen when they found out. I made my choice. And that choice should not cost you your livelihood." Sam stopped pacing and turned to face her, his expression intense. "Come with me." "What?" "Come with me to Montana. Leave this place and start fresh." He crossed the room and took her hands in his. "I have been trying to find the right time to ask, the right words, but I cannot wait any longer. Clara, I love you. I love your strength and your kindness, and the way you refuse to give up, even when the world gives you every reason to. I love that you saw a wounded stranger on the road and chose to help him when everyone else would have walked away. I love everything about you, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it." Clara's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear over it. "Sam, I know I'm asking you to leave everything you know. I know it is a lot, but I promise you, if you come with me, I will spend every day for the rest of my life trying to make you happy." He got down on one knee, and Clara's breath caught in her throat. "Clara Whitmore, will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Clara's face, but she was smiling, smiling so wide her cheeks hurt. "Yes, yes, Sam, 1,000 times yes." He was on his feet in an instant, sweeping her into his arms and spinning her around until she was dizzy with laughter. When he set her down, he kissed her, deep and thorough, and Clara felt like she was flying. "I will make you happy," he murmured against her lips. "I swear it. You already do." They were married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony at the church on the edge of town. Clara wore a dress she had made herself, simple white cotton with lace trim that she had been saving for years without knowing why. Sam wore a new suit, ordered from Denver, and looked so handsome that Clara almost forgot her own name when she saw him standing at the altar. He had tears in his eyes as she walked toward him, and Clara felt her own vision blur as she took her place beside him. Here, in this small church with its peeling paint and worn pews, 2 lonely souls were joining together to face the world as one. It felt like a miracle. The only guests were the preacher's wife and the telegraph operator, who had become something of an ally since discovering Sam's identity. The rest of the town stayed away, their disapproval a wall of silence that surrounded the church like a storm cloud. But Clara did not care. She had everything she needed right in front of her. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Sam kissed her with such tenderness that she felt it all the way to her bones, and when he pulled back, there were tears in his eyes. "I never thought I would have this," he said quietly. "I thought I was destined to live alone, carrying my guilt and my grief until the day I died. But you changed everything, Clara. You gave me a reason to keep going. You saved me in ways you will never know." Clara reached up to touch his face, her thumb tracing the line of his cheekbone. "We saved each other." That night, in the small cabin that had sheltered them through so much, Sam held Clara in his arms and whispered promises against her hair. Promises of a future together, of a home filled with love and laughter, of children and grandchildren and generations yet to come. "I cannot give you back the years you spent alone," he murmured, "but I can promise you this: you will never be alone again. As long as I draw breath, you will have someone who loves you, who cherishes you, who thinks you are the most precious treasure in all the world." Clara buried her face against his chest, breathing in the scent of him, leather and pine, and something that was uniquely Sam. "That is all I have ever wanted," she whispered, "just to belong to someone, just to be loved." "You are loved, Clara, more than you know, more than I can ever express." And she believed him. The journey to Montana took 3 weeks. Sam had purchased a wagon and 2 sturdy horses, along with enough supplies to last them through the trip. Clara had packed her meager belongings, leaving behind the cabin that had been her home for so long. She did not look back as they drove away. There was nothing there for her anymore. Her whole life, everything that mattered, was sitting right beside her on the wagon seat. The first few days were the hardest. Clara had never traveled so far from home, and the vastness of the land intimidated her. The roads were rough and dusty, the nights cold and unfamiliar. But Sam was patient and kind, making sure she was comfortable, stopping whenever she needed rest, telling her stories to pass the long hours. "Tell me about the ranch again," she would say, and Sam's face would light up with the joy of a man talking about his greatest love. "There are 3,000 acres, he would begin, and in the spring, when the snow melts and the grass turns green, you can see for miles and miles. The cattle spread out across the valley like a moving carpet, and the sky is so blue it hurts to look at it." Clara would close her eyes and try to picture it, this place that would be her new home. She had never seen 3,000 acres of anything. She had never seen cattle grazing on open land or mountains reaching for the sky. Everything Sam described sounded like a dream, too beautiful to be real. "Are you scared?" Sam asked one night as they lay together under the stars. Clara thought about the question before answering. "A little," she admitted. "I have never been anywhere. I do not know if I will fit in, if people will accept me." Sam rolled onto his side to face her, his dark eyes serious in the moonlight. "The people at the ranch are good people. They will love you because you are good and kind, and everything a person should be. And even if they did not, it would not matter. You are my wife. You belong there because I belong there. Nothing will ever change that." Clara reached out and traced the line of his jaw. "How did I get so lucky?" "You stopped to help a stranger on a frozen road. That is how. You were brave and kind when most people would have been neither." He caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "I am the lucky one, Clara. Never doubt that." The landscape changed as they traveled north, the rolling hills of Colorado giving way to vast plains that seemed to stretch forever. Clara had never seen anything like it. The sky was enormous, a dome of endless blue that made her feel small and insignificant and wonderfully free all at once. Sam told her stories as they traveled, pointing out landmarks and sharing memories of his childhood. His father had come to Montana as a young man with nothing but a dream and a stubborn refusal to fail. He had built the ranch from the ground up, turning a patch of wilderness into one of the most successful cattle operations in the territory. "He would have liked you," Sam said, his voice soft with memory. "He always said that a man's true worth is measured by the company he keeps. You would have impressed him, Clara, your strength, your resilience." "I wish I could have met him." "So do I." Sam reached over to take her hand, squeezing gently. "But he would have been proud to call you his daughter." When they finally crested the last hill and the ranch came into view, Clara gasped. It was enormous. A sprawling white house with a wraparound porch sat at the center of the property, surrounded by barns and bunkhouses and corrals filled with horses. In the distance, cattle dotted the landscape like specks of brown against the green grass, and beyond them the mountains rose into the sky, their peaks dusted with snow. "Welcome home," Sam said. Clara could not speak. Tears were streaming down her face, blurring the view into a watercolor of greens and blues and whites. She had spent her entire life in a cramped cabin, dreaming of something more. And now here she was, standing at the edge of a world she had never dared to imagine. The staff were waiting when they arrived, lined up on the porch like soldiers at attention. There were cowboys with weathered faces and kind eyes, maids in starched aprons, a cook who reminded Clara of her mother, round and warm and smelling of fresh bread. And there was someone else, a young woman with dark hair and Sam's brown eyes, hovering at the edge of the group with an expression that hovered between curiosity and suspicion. "That is my niece," Sam said quietly. "Thomas's daughter. Her name is Lily. She has lived here since her father died." Clara's heart ached for the girl. She knew what it was to lose a parent, to feel alone in the world. She smiled at Lily, hoping to convey understanding, but the girl just stared back, her expression guarded. The first few weeks were difficult. The staff was polite but wary, unsure what to make of the master's new bride. They had expected Sam to marry someone of his own class, some wealthy rancher's daughter or a society woman from back east. Instead, he had returned with a penniless seamstress from a tiny town in Colorado. Clara overheard the whispers when they thought she could not hear. "She is not even pretty," one of the maids said. "What does he see in her?" Another voice answered, "Maybe she has her hooks in him. You know how men can be fooled." The words stung, but Clara refused to let them break her. She had faced worse, she had survived worse, and she would not let the gossip of strangers steal her happiness. She threw herself into learning everything she could about the ranch. She woke early and went to bed late, observing the routines that kept the operation running. She introduced herself to each of the ranch hands, memorizing names and faces, asking about their families and their histories. She visited the kitchens and learned the cooks' recipes, helped the housekeepers with their mending, and spent hours in the stable, brushing the horses until their coats gleamed. Slowly, gradually, the wariness began to fade. The staff saw that Clara was not the gold digger they had feared, not some cunning woman who had trapped their master into marriage. She was kind and hard-working and genuinely interested in their lives. She remembered birthdays and asked after sick children, and always had a kind word for anyone who looked like they needed one. "She is nothing like what we expected," she overheard the cook telling one of the maids, weeks later. "She works harder than any of us. And the way she looks at Mr. Blackwood, you can see she loves him, really loves him, not for his money but for himself." Clara smiled and kept walking, her heart warm with the knowledge that she was finally being seen for who she truly was. But Lily remained distant, and her coldness cut deeper than any of the staff's wariness. "She blames me," Clara said to Sam one night, curled against him in their bed, "for taking Thomas's place in your heart." Sam sighed, pulling her closer. Her father was her whole world. "When he died, she lost everything. I have done my best to fill that gap, but I'm not him. I can never be him." "Does she hate me?" "She does not know you yet. Give her time, Clara. She will come around." But time passed, and Lily did not come around. She ate her meals in silence, answered questions in monosyllables, and disappeared to her room the moment dinner was over. Clara tried everything she could think of. She invited the girl to help with her sewing, offered to teach her to cook, suggested they take walks together around the property. Every offer was declined with a polite but firm refusal. Then, one afternoon, everything changed. Clara was walking back from the henhouse, a basket of eggs in her arms, when she heard screaming coming from the barn. Without thinking, she dropped the basket and ran. What she found inside made her blood run cold. Lily was trapped in one of the stalls, backed against the wall by a horse that had clearly been spooked. The animal was rearing and kicking, its eyes wild with panic, and Lily was crying, her face pale with terror. Clara did not hesitate. She grabbed a rope from the wall and stepped into the stall, putting herself between the girl and the horse. "Easy," she murmured, keeping her voice low and soothing. "Easy now. It is all right. No one is going to hurt you." The horse snorted and stamped, but Clara kept talking, kept approaching, her movements slow and deliberate. She had never worked with horses before, but she had learned from watching Sam, from the quiet way he handled the animals, the respect he showed them. Slowly, painfully slowly, the horse began to calm. Its ears stopped pinning back, and its eyes lost some of their wildness. Clara reached out, letting the animal sniff her hand, and when it did not pull away, she stroked its muzzle gently. "There we go. That is a good girl. Nothing to be afraid of." She turned to Lily, who was still pressed against the wall, tears streaming down her face. "Are you hurt?" The girl shook her head, but she was trembling, her breath coming in short gasps. Clara held out her hand. "Come on, let us get out of here." Lily stared at her hand for a moment, then reached out and took it. Her fingers were ice-cold and shaking, but she let Clara lead her out of the stall and into the relative safety of the barn aisle. The moment they were clear, Lily collapsed against Clara, sobbing. "I am sorry. I am so sorry. I should not have gone in there. I just wanted to see the new foal, and then the mare came back, and she was so angry, and I thought I was going to die." Clara held her, stroking her hair, murmuring comfort. "It is all right. You are safe now. Everything is all right." They stayed like that for a long time, until Lily's sobs faded to hiccups and her trembling stopped. When she finally pulled back, there was something different in her eyes. The coldness was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like wonder. "You saved my life." Clara shook her head. The mare would have calmed down eventually. She was just protecting her foal. "But you did not know that. You came in anyway. You put yourself in danger for me." Lily's voice broke. "Why? Why would you do that?" Clara reached out and cupped the girl's face in her hands. "Because you matter, Lily. Because you are Sam's family, which makes you my family. And family protects each other. Always." Something broke open in Lily then, a dam that had been holding back years of grief and loneliness. She threw her arms around Clara and held on like she was drowning. "I miss him," she whispered. "I miss my father so much. I know, sweetheart. I know." They walked back to the house together, hand in hand, and for the first time since Clara had arrived, Lily smiled. The seasons changed. Spring turned to summer, summer to fall, fall to the bitter cold of a Montana winter. Clara had never been happier. The ranch felt like home now, filled with warmth and laughter and love. The staff had accepted her, won over by her kindness and her willingness to work alongside them. Lily had become the daughter Clara never had, following her everywhere, eager to learn, to help, to be close to this woman who had risked her life to save her. In the mornings, Clara would sit on the porch with a cup of coffee and watch the sun rise over the mountains. The beauty of it never failed to take her breath away, the way the light painted the peaks in shades of gold and rose. She would think about her old life, the cramped cabin and the constant struggle just to survive, and she would shake her head in wonder at how far she had come. Sam would join her there most mornings, pulling up a chair beside her, sometimes reaching over to take her hand. They did not always need to speak. Sometimes they just sat together in companionable silence, watching the world wake up, grateful beyond words for the life they had built. "I love you," Sam would say, out of nowhere, at random moments throughout the day, when she was kneading bread in the kitchen, when she was brushing her hair before bed, when she was laughing at something Lily had said. "I love you, Clara Blackwood. Never forget it." "I love you too," she would answer, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. They found joy in the small things. Riding together across the vast expanse of the ranch, with Sam pointing out his favorite spots and telling her the history of the land. Reading together by the fire on cold winter evenings, Clara's head resting on Sam's shoulder. Dancing in the kitchen to no music at all, just the rhythm of their own hearts. And Sam. Sam was everything she had never dared to dream of. He loved her fiercely, protectively, with a devotion that sometimes took her breath away. He brought her wildflowers from the meadow and read poetry to her by the fire. He held her through nightmares and celebrated her triumphs. He made her feel safe and cherished, and utterly, completely seen. But more than that, he made her feel like she belonged, like she had finally found the place where she was meant to be. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains, Sam reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I know we are already married," he said, a hint of nervousness in his voice, "but I wanted to give you this, to make it official." Clara opened the box and gasped. Inside was a ring, the most beautiful ring she had ever seen. A delicate band of gold, set with a single sapphire that matched the color of the Montana sky. "It was my mother's," Sam said. "She wore it every day until the day she died. I always swore I would only give it to someone who was worthy of it." He took the ring from the box and slipped it onto her finger. "You are worthy, Clara, more than worthy." Tears were streaming down Clara's face, but she was smiling, smiling so wide her cheeks ached. "I love you," she said. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes." Sam cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "Do not be scared. I am not going anywhere. You are stuck with me, Mrs. Blackwood, for the rest of our lives." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, and Clara felt her heart swell with a joy so intense it was almost painful. She had spent so many years alone, so many years believing that happiness was something that happened to other people. But here she was, loved and loving, surrounded by family and beauty and hope. She thought about the road where it had all begun, the frozen mud, the dying light, the stranger bleeding in the brambles. She had stopped that day because she could not bear to leave a man to die alone in the cold. She had no idea that by saving him, she was saving herself. "What are you thinking about?" Sam asked, his voice soft. Clara smiled and leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder. "I am thinking about how strange life is, how the worst moments can lead to the best ones, how helping a stranger on a frozen road can change everything." Sam pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I think about that too, every single day. I think about how I almost died, and how instead I found you. I think about how empty my life was before, and how full it is now." He pulled back to look at her, his dark eyes shining with love. "You are my miracle, Clara, my second chance. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure you know how grateful I am that you stopped that day." Clara reached up and touched his face, tracing the lines she had come to know so well. The strong jaw, the weathered skin, the eyes that held such depth, such kindness, such love. "I would stop again," she said. 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times. I would stop every single time. "I know you would. That is who you are. That is why I love you." They sat there together, wrapped in each other's arms, watching the last rays of sunlight paint the mountains gold. And Clara felt, for the first time in her life, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The years that followed were kind. Clara and Sam built a life together, a beautiful life filled with love and laughter and the occasional hardship that only made them stronger. They had 2 children, a boy named Thomas, after Sam's brother, and a girl named Rose, after Clara's mother. The children grew up wild and free on the ranch, learning to ride before they could read, growing strong under the vast Montana sky. Thomas was the spitting image of his father, tall and strong, with the same serious expression and quiet demeanor. But when he smiled, Clara could see herself in him, the same warmth and kindness that had defined her whole life. He was a thoughtful boy, always watching, always learning, and Sam often said that he would make a fine rancher one day. Rose was Clara's shadow, a bright-eyed girl with her grandmother's love of flowers and her mother's stubborn streak. She collected wildflowers and pressed them in books, named all the horses in the stable, and declared at the age of 6 that she would never marry because no boy could ever be as good as her papa. Sam laughed when she said it, but there were tears in his eyes too. "Our children are miracles," he told Clara one night as they watched the little ones sleep in their beds. "I never thought I would have a family. After Thomas died, I thought that part of my life was over. But you gave me this. You gave me everything." Clara leaned into him, breathing in his familiar scent. "We gave each other everything. That is what marriage is. That is what love is." Lily flourished too. She blossomed into a confident young woman, eventually falling in love with one of the ranch hands, a quiet, steady man named Jacob, who adored her. He had come to the ranch as a teenager, an orphan with nowhere else to go, and had worked his way up to become one of Sam's most trusted men. He looked at Lily like she hung the moon, and Lily looked back at him like he was her whole world. Clara stood beside her on her wedding day, tears of joy streaming down her face, and thought about how far they had both come. From a girl frozen with terror in a horse stall to a radiant bride, glowing with happiness. From a penniless seamstress to the mistress of one of the largest ranches in Montana. They had both been transformed by love, both given second chances they never expected. "Thank you," Lily whispered as Clara helped her adjust her veil. "For everything, for saving me that day, for loving my uncle, for being the mother I never had." Clara pulled her into a fierce embrace. "You never have to thank me for loving you. That was the easiest thing I have ever done." Clara never forgot what it was like to be poor. She never forgot the hunger, the cold, the desperate scramble to survive. And so she made sure that no one who came to her door ever left empty-handed. The ranch became known throughout the territory as a place of refuge, a place where those in need could find food and shelter and kindness. "You are too generous," Sam teased her sometimes. "You will bankrupt us." "Then we will be bankrupt together," Clara would reply, and Sam would laugh and kiss her and tell her he loved her, as he did every single day. When Clara was 62 years old, Sam took ill. It happened suddenly, a cough that would not go away, a weakness that settled into his bones. The doctor came and shook his head and said there was nothing to be done. It was simply his time. Clara nursed him through it, just as she had nursed him through that first illness so many years ago. She bathed his forehead and held his hand and told him stories about their life together, about the children and the grandchildren, and all the joy they had shared. On his last night, Sam looked up at her with those dark eyes she had loved for so long and smiled. "Do you remember the road?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Clara nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I remember. You stopped for me. You did not have to, but you did. You changed my life, Clara. You saved me. We saved each other." He reached up, his hand trembling, and touched her face. "I am not afraid. I have had a good life, the best life, because of you." "I love you," Clara whispered. "I love you so much. I love you too, always, forever." He closed his eyes, and a few moments later, he was gone. Clara sat with him until dawn, holding his hand, memorizing the lines of his face. She thought about the journey they had taken together, the frozen road and the tiny cabin, the long trip to Montana and the life they had built. She thought about love and loss, and the strange, miraculous way that helping a stranger had led her to everything she had ever wanted. When the sun rose, painting the mountains in shades of pink and gold, Clara leaned down and pressed a kiss to Sam's forehead. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for everything." She buried him on the hill overlooking the ranch, the place where they had watched so many sunsets together. Their children and grandchildren gathered around, and stories were told, and tears were shed, and Clara felt the weight of her grief like a stone in her chest. But beneath the grief, there was gratitude. Gratitude for the years they had shared. Gratitude for the love that had sustained them. Gratitude for a life so full and rich that it almost did not seem possible. Clara lived for another 10 years, surrounded by family, surrounded by love. She told her grandchildren stories about their grandfather, about the brave man she had found on a frozen road so many years ago. She told them about kindness and courage and the way that one simple act of compassion could change the course of a life. And when it was her time to go, she went peacefully, a smile on her lips and Sam's name on her heart. They buried her beside him, on the hill overlooking the ranch. And if you go there today, you can still see their graves, side by side, 2 simple stones with a single inscription. They saved each other. The legacy Clara left behind endured for generations. Her children inherited her compassion, carrying on the tradition of helping those in need. The ranch became a beacon of hope in the territory, known far and wide as a place where anyone could find a meal, a bed, and a kind word. Travelers who had lost their way, families fleeing hardship, orphans with nowhere else to go. All were welcomed at the Blackwood Ranch. Thomas, Clara's son, grew into a man who looked so much like his father that it sometimes made Clara's heart ache. He had Sam's broad shoulders and steady hands, his quiet strength and fierce loyalty. but he had Clara's eyes, warm and full of kindness, and her stubborn refusal to give up on anyone. He married a schoolteacher from the East, a woman named Elizabeth, who shared his passion for helping others. Together, they expanded the ranch's charitable work, building a small school for the children of ranch hands, and establishing a fund to help families who had fallen on hard times. Rose, Clara's daughter, inherited her mother's gift for sewing and her grandmother's love of flowers. She never married, preferring instead to devote herself to the garden she cultivated behind the main house. The garden became famous throughout the territory, a riot of color and fragrance that drew visitors from miles around. Rose would walk among the blooms, her silver hair gleaming in the sunlight, and tell anyone who would listen about her parents. They found each other on a frozen road, she would say, her eyes soft with memory. My mother stopped to help a stranger, and that stranger turned out to be the love of her life. It just goes to show that you never know when kindness will come back to you. Lily lived to be 94, a grand old matriarch surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She never forgot the day Clara had saved her from the spooked horse, and she passed that story down through the generations like a sacred trust. She did not hesitate, Lily would say, her voice trembling with age but still clear. She put herself between me and that horse without a second thought. That is the kind of woman she was. That is the kind of love she had. The story of Clara and Sam became a legend in those parts. People spoke of them with reverence, pointing to the hill where they were buried, telling the tale to their children and their children's children. It was a story of hope and redemption, of second chances and unexpected love. A story that proved that even in the darkest moments, light could be found. Decades later, when the ranch had passed through generations of Blackwoods and the original cabin in Colorado had long since crumbled to dust, a young writer came to Montana researching stories of the Old West. She heard about the Blackwood legend and made her way to the ranch, notebook in hand, eager to learn more. The current owner, a great-great-grandson of Clara and Sam, welcomed her with the same hospitality his ancestors had shown. He led her to the hill where his forebears were buried, two weathered stones standing sentinel over the valley below. They were something special, he said, his voice thick with pride. My great-great-grandmother especially. She came from nothing, you know. A poor seamstress with nothing but a leaky cabin and a good heart. But she saw a man dying on the road and she stopped. She could have kept walking. Most people would have. But she stopped and she saved him, and he spent the rest of his life trying to deserve her. The writer looked at the graves, at the inscription that had endured through years of sun and rain and snow. They saved each other. Did they? She asked. Did they really save each other? The man smiled, the same smile that had graced Sam's face a century and a half before. That is what the story says. But I think it is more than that. I think they did not just save each other's lives. They saved each other's souls. They found each other at the exact moment when they needed each other most, and they held on. They held on through everything. That is the real miracle. Not the rescue, but the holding on. The writer nodded slowly, her pen moving across the page. What do you think she would say? She asked. If she could see all this, the ranch, the family, the legacy she left behind? The man thought about it for a long moment, his eyes on the distant mountains. I think she would say that it was worth it. Every hardship, every struggle, every moment of doubt and fear. I think she would say that love is always worth it, even when it is hard, especially when it is hard. He turned to look at the writer, his expression serious. My great-great-grandmother used to say that kindness is never wasted, that every small act of compassion ripples outward, touching lives you will never see. She believed that one person could change the world, one kind deed at a time. He gestured at the ranch spread out below them, at the cattle grazing in the fields, and the children playing in the yard, and the house that had sheltered generations of his family. I think she was right. I think she proved it. The writer stayed at the ranch for a week, gathering stories and taking photographs and trying to capture the essence of what Clara and Sam had built. When she finally left, she carried with her a sense of wonder that she had not expected to find. She wrote their story, and it was published in a magazine back east, and people read it and wept and wondered if such love could really exist. Some said it was too good to be true, a fairy tale dressed up as history, but others believed. Others read about Clara and Sam and felt something stir in their hearts, a hope that maybe, just maybe, the world was not as cold and cruel as it sometimes seemed. And somewhere, in a quiet corner of heaven, Clara and Sam watched over the family they had built, the legacy they had left behind. They saw the children and the grandchildren and the great-great-grandchildren, and they knew that their love had endured. They had saved each other, and in doing so they had created something that would last forever. A love story for the ages, a testament to the power of kindness. A reminder that even on the coldest, darkest roads, there is always the possibility of warmth, of light, of a helping hand reaching out to pull you from the darkness. Clara had stopped on that frozen road so many years ago because she could not bear to leave a stranger to die alone. She had no way of knowing that her simple act of compassion would lead to the greatest adventure of her life. But that was the beauty of it, was it not? The not knowing. The stepping forward into the unknown, armed with nothing but kindness and hope. She had been poor and alone and overlooked, a woman the world had dismissed as worthless. But she had proven them wrong. She had proven that worth is not measured in money or status or beauty, but in the choices we make, the love we give, the lives we touch. And in the end, she had been rich beyond measure. Rich in love. Rich in family. Rich in the knowledge that she had made a difference, that her life had mattered, that she had left the world a little better than she had found it. It was all she had ever wanted. It was more than she had ever dreamed. And as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose and deepest purple, the spirits of Clara and Sam watched over their family, their legacy, their love, together, forever, home at last.